In September 1995, the FBI's Los Angeles office received a strange tip. An anonymous source claimed that David Bowie's newly released 1 Point Outside album contained details about an unsolved murder case. 2 agents listened to the entire album and were shocked. Details in The Heart's Filthy Lesson matched an art gallery murder from 1988 in Los Angeles that remained unsolved. Symbols found on the victim's body were nearly identical to the imagery on the album cover. The FBI contacted Bowie's management requesting an informal interview, but Bowie refused, and his lawyers sent the message, "This is a work of art, not reality." The FBI closed the inquiry, but the file remained marked as open. 30 years later, that murder is still unsolved, and Bowie fans are still asking, did David really know something? Was the Nathan Adler character real? And why was the Outside 2 album never released? If you want to explore music history's darkest mysteries, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. In late 1993, David Bowie was at a crossroads. The Tin Machine project had failed, and the music industry was starting to view him as past his prime. He was 46 years old and wanted to be relevant again. He reunited with Brian Eno, and they began working on a radical idea, a concept album about murders committed as art. But for Bowie, this wasn't just a concept. It became an obsession. In early 1994, Bowie transformed a room in his New York home into a full-scale crime investigation center. The walls were covered with real crime scene photos, photocopies of FBI reports on serial killers, and maps of unsolved murder cases. Carlos Alomar, Bowie's longtime guitarist, says he was disturbed when he recalls this period. Bowie's home looked like a detective's office, and David was focused on exploring the line between art and murder. Bowie began studying real serial killer cases. Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and especially Charles Manson's helter-skelter doctrine fascinated him. Manson's way of combining art with violence formed the foundation of Bowie's One Outside concept. But Bowie wanted to go deeper, not just famous cases but unsolved ones. In summer 1994, Bowie found something. In the Los Angeles Police Department archives, a case from 1988 that had never been solved, the gallery murder. A young woman's body found in an art gallery, with strange symbols on her body, positioned as if it were part of an art installation. The media hadn't paid much attention because the victim's identity was unclear and the case had gone cold. Bowie became fixated on this case. Later that year, he flew from New York to Los Angeles and visited the area where the gallery was located. The old gallery was now empty, but Bowie stood there for hours, studying the space, taking photos. After this visit, he wrote in his notes, "This wasn't just murder, this was a performance." When Brian Eno arrived at Mountain Studios in Switzerland for the 8 Outs recordings, he noticed Bowie had changed. David wasn't David anymore, he'd become Nathan Adler. In the album concept, Nathan Adler was an art crime detective investigating a murder where a victim named Baby Grace Blue had been turned into a work of art. But Bowie was living this character so deeply that Eno and the other musicians started getting uncomfortable. Years later, Eno said in an interview that Bowie would come to the studio as Nathan, speaking in the first person. He was acting as if he really were a detective. During the recordings, Bowie kept a notebook he called Nathan Adler's Diary. In this notebook, he wrote details of the fictional murder in the album, but also took notes from real cases. That 1988 Los Angeles gallery murder case was at the center of these notes. The details Bowie wrote in his notebook: the victim, a woman in her 20s with no identification, geometric symbols on her body, specifically a triangle and circle combination on her chest. Position, on her back, arms spread to the sides, displayed as if she were a work of art. Location, a small art gallery in downtown Los Angeles. No witnesses, no physical evidence. These details were reflected almost exactly in the death scene of the Baby Grace Blue character in Bowie's One Outside album. Similar symbols appeared in the visuals used on the album cover. During studio recordings, Bowie would tell other musicians about Nathan Adler as if he were a real person. He'd use phrases like, "Nathan told me about this case," or "according to Nathan's notes." Mike Garson, the pianist, said this situation made him uncomfortable. The line between David and Nathan had blurred. Sometimes David really thought he was Nathan, but there was something even more interesting. After the album was released in 1995, some researcher fans discovered that someone named Detective N. Adler had worked at the Los Angeles Police Department in the late 1980s. This person had suddenly resigned in 1989. A few files surfaced. Adler had worked on several cases in the art crime category, and yes, the 1988 gallery murder case was in his files. When the 1 Point Outside album was released in September 1995, critics gave mixed reactions, but one person reacted very differently: retired Los Angeles detective James Morrison. Morrison was a detective who had worked on the 1988 gallery murder case but never solved it. He'd retired in 1995, but the case still bothered him. One day, he heard Bowie's new album on the radio, and as he listened to the lyrics, he froze. Details in The Heart's Filthy Lesson, the symbols, the position, the gallery setting, matched the case he couldn't solve. Morrison sent a report to the FBI. The FBI didn't take it seriously at first, but Morrison insisted and sent a detailed comparison. The symbols on the album cover showed similarities to the symbols on the victim's body. The death as art concept in the lyrics matched the arrangement of the crime scene. The FBI decided to investigate. 2 agents listened to the album, read the liner notes, and watched Bowie's interviews. In one interview, Bowie had said, "I drew inspiration from real crime cases, especially unsolved cases interest me." In October 1995, the FBI contacted Bowie's manager, Bill Zisblatt. Not an official investigation, just a request for an informal conversation. They wanted to know if Bowie had any knowledge about the 1988 gallery murder case. Bill Zisblatt was shocked. He immediately consulted with Bowie's lawyers. The lawyers gave a clear response: David Bowie will not participate in any official investigation. This is a work of art and is protected by the First Amendment. The FBI marked the file as open but not active. They added a note: if new evidence emerges, a conversation with David Bowie may be necessary. On September 14, 1995, the 1 Point Outside album launch in London had a strange atmosphere. When Bowie took the stage, the room contained not just music journalists and fans, but also several plainclothes police detectives. Bowie's security team noticed them, but they'd shown identification. During the launch, Bowie embodied the Nathan Adler character. He came on stage in a detective costume and described the Baby Grace Blue murder. The details were disturbing: cuts on the body, symbols, a corpse displayed as an art installation. Some people left the room, but the detectives stayed and took notes. After the launch, a journalist asked Bowie, "Is this inspired by a real murder?" Bowie smiled. "I just told a story. I explored the relationship between art and violence. If this seems to resemble a real case, it's because real life is sometimes darker than art." But then he added something interesting: Nathan Adler could be a real person, or maybe not. I don't even know the answer to that question myself. After that night, Bowie began talking less about Nathan Adler in press interviews. It was as if something had silenced him. In an interview with a British music magazine, he said, "I don't want to talk too much about Nathan, because he's starting to become more real than I am." Between 1996 and 1999, Bowie announced he was working on a continuation of the Outside series. He was going to publish a book called The Nathan Adler Diaries and then make the 2 Point Outside album. Brian Eno was ready to return to the project. Studio time had been reserved. Fans were excited because Bowie had said Outside 2 would be darker, more disturbing. Nathan Adler's past would be explored. New murders would be solved. In a 1997 interview, Bowie said, "Nathan's story isn't over yet. There's much more to tell." But in November 1999, without any warning, the project was cancelled. Bowie's official statement was very brief: "I'm not ready to tell this story right now, maybe in the future." Tony Visconti, Bowie's producer and close friend, shared something years later. In 1999, Bowie told him, "Some doors shouldn't be opened. I went too deep with Outside 1 and found disturbing things. If I continue, it'll be dangerous." Reeves Gabrels, Bowie's guitarist at the time, added another detail. In 1998, Bowie talked to him about Nathan Adler and said, "Nathan is real. I talked to him and he told me I shouldn't make Outside 2. Something had changed in Bowie's behavior in 1999. David, who used to be open and talkative, had closed up about Outside. When a fan asked at a concert, "When is Outside 2 coming out?" Bowie simply said never and changed the subject. So what was that mysterious 1988 Los Angeles gallery murder case really about? According to official records, on November 3, 1988, at a small art gallery called Art Space Gallery in downtown Los Angeles, the gallery owner entered in the morning and was shocked. In the center of his gallery, on a white platform, was a young woman's body. The woman was lying on her back, arms spread to the sides, arranged as if she were part of an art installation. There were strange symbols on the victim's body, a triangle with a circle inside, carved with a sharp instrument on her chest. Art historians said it resembled the geometric forms of the suprematism movement. It was reminiscent of Malevich's works. The victim's identity was never established. Her fingerprints weren't in any database. There was no identification on her body. How she got into the gallery, who left her there, who the killer was, none of it was ever solved. Detective James Morrison investigated the case for 6 months but found no leads. The gallery owner had no connections. There were no security cameras, no witnesses. The case went cold and the file was archived as unsolved. What's interesting is that when the gallery owner first found the body, he said, "I thought it was a work of art." The victim's position was so carefully arranged that it looked like a real installation. The gallery owner even thought for a few seconds that this might be a new exhibition piece. The death scene of the baby Grace Blue character in Bowie's One Outside album contained details very similar to this real case. Geometric symbols, art gallery setting, unidentified victim, displayed as a work of art. Too many similarities to be coincidence. So how did Bowie access this information? Official police files weren't public. Only police department personnel and the detectives involved could access these details. In the 2000s, some Bowie fans began researching whether Nathan Adler was real. Internet archives, Los Angeles Police Department records, interviews with retired detectives, all trying to find Nathan Adler. The result was surprising. It was discovered that someone named Detective Norman Adler had worked at the Los Angeles Police Department between 1982 and 1989. Norman Adler, born in 1950, had become a detective in 1982, his unit, Art Crime Unit. But in February 1989, Norman Adler suddenly resigned. Official reason, personal reasons, no other information. Retirement files were minimal. The date he resigned was just 3 months after the 1988 gallery murder case. Fans trying to find Norman Adler discovered he'd completely disappeared in the 1990s. No address records, no phone records, no social security records. It was as if he'd vanished. In 2005, a fan found someone named N. Adler in a small town in Arizona. He sent an email, "Are you the former Los Angeles detective?" The response was short and firm. "Yes, but I don't want to talk about that period. Please don't bother me." Was this person really that detective? And had Bowie ever met him? In 2010, another researcher fan discovered that David Bowie had spent time in Los Angeles between 1993 doing crime research. Maybe he'd met retired detective Norman Adler during that time, but there was no definitive proof. Between 2000 and 2016, Bowie stayed away from the Outside topic. The album became a cult classic among fans, but Bowie rarely mentioned it. When asked about Outside 2 in interviews, he always gave the same answer: "That story is finished. I'm focusing on new stories," but some close friends say Bowie was still affected by the Outside period. Tony Visconti, David would sometimes talk about Nathan Adler as if he were a real person. When Bowie released the Next Day album in 2013, one song had an interesting line, "I know something you don't know." Fans thought this was a reference to Outside 2. The question of whether Bowie really knew something was up for debate again. In 2015, Bowie was diagnosed with liver cancer. While working on his final album, Black Star, he told producer Tony Visconti, "If I die, destroy my personal files, especially the Outside files. Nobody should see them." Visconti was shocked and asked why. Bowie simply said, "Because some things should go to the grave." On January 10, 2016, David Bowie died. There was a strange clause in his will, NA files and outside 2 materials to be destroyed. Coco Schwab, Bowie's assistant, carried out this instruction. Files and recordings of unknown content were burned. Some parts of Bowie's will emerged due to legal requirements. In addition to the NA files clause, there was another. "If Norman Adler is alive, convey my thanks to him." What did this mean? What had Norman Adler, if he was a real person, done for Bowie? Had he provided information? Had he given a warning? Or was Bowie just thanking a fictional character? In 2017, Coco Schwab commented once about Outside. "David discovered things during the Outside period. He never told me exactly what, but he was troubled. He'd said, 'Some stories are better left unfinished.'" Duncan Jones, Bowie's son, found a notebook from the Outside period while sorting through his father's personal belongings. The notebook contained Nathan Adler's diaries, but Duncan didn't read them. "My father wanted me to destroy them, but I'm keeping them. Maybe one day they'll be made public, maybe not," he said. What's written in that notebook? Had Bowie really met a detective? What did he know about the 1988 gallery murder? And most importantly, was Nathan Adler real? As of 2024, the 1988 Los Angeles gallery murder case remains unsolved. The victim's identity is still unknown. The killer has never been found. The file sits in the Los Angeles Police Department as a cold case. Some true crime researchers showed renewed interest in the case after Bowie's album, but no new evidence was found. Detective James Morrison died in 2008, and before his death, he said in an interview, "Bowie knew something but never talked. That secret went with him." In 2019, a true crime podcast covered the 1988 gallery murder case and investigated the Bowie connection. The podcast's conclusion: David Bowie may have had a connection to the real case, but there's no definitive proof. Maybe coincidence, maybe more. We'll never know, but there are theories. First theory: Bowie just did research, somehow accessed real police files, and took inspiration. Second theory: Bowie met retired detective Norman Adler, and he showed him the files. Third theory: Bowie saw or heard something and reflected it in his album. The 1 Point Outside album is now considered one of Bowie's most controversial and mysterious works. It received mixed reviews musically, but the concept was bold and disturbing. And its story, the real murder connection, FBI interest, the Nathan Adler mystery, turned the album into legend. Brian Eno talked about Outside in a 2020 interview. "That album changed David. He went very deep and found things. He never told me exactly what he found, but that experience affected him. Not making Outside 2 was probably the best decision." 1 Point Outside isn't just an album, it's an unsolved mystery. Was Nathan Adler real? What did Bowie know about the 1988 murder? Why was Outside 2 cancelled? And what was in those destroyed files? These questions will probably remain unanswered forever, because David Bowie kept his mystery. He blurred the line between art and reality so much that it's now impossible to distinguish what was real and what was fiction. Maybe that was Bowie's intention. Maybe Nathan Adler really existed, but only in Bowie's mind. Maybe the 1988 gallery murder was just a terrible coincidence. Or maybe, minus just maybe, David Bowie really knew something and took that secret to his grave. When you listen to One Outside, remember, every song could be a clue, every lyric could be a confession, and Nathan Adler is still out there somewhere, maybe real, maybe imaginary, waiting for his story to be told. If you want to dive into music history's darkest mysteries and discover unsolved secrets, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because some stories never end, they just transform into deeper mysteries.